Meeting number 33 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members before I commence. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom is at the bottom of your screen, and you have a choice of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, September 21st, 2022, the committee commences its study of the extreme flooding in Pakistan. It is now my pleasure to welcome from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Mrs. Mary Louise Hannan, the Director General of the South Asia Bureau. We have Mr. Christopher Gibbons, the Executive Director of Afghanistan-Pakistan Division. And we also have Mrs. Tara Carney, the Acting Director General of the International Humanitarian Assistance Bureau. You will each be provided 5 minutes for your remarks, after which we will turn to the members for any questions they may have. So if we could please
Mr. Chair,
start
can I just
with...
raise a point of order before the witnesses begin?
Yes, Mr. Janice.
Mr. Chair, I and maybe other members were disappointed that Monday's meeting was canceled. Obviously, that's not something we want to see happen, especially with short notice and without consultation. I wonder if you can just advise the committee as to why Monday's meeting was canceled, and I hope we don't see last-minute cancellations of meetings. There were a number of issues we could have considered at that meeting. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Janice. I have to say that I am fully aware of the fact that you were disappointed. It was something that you emphasized in the proceedings in the House yesterday on several occasions, so it comes as no surprise. But as you're aware, our intent was to hear both from yourself and the principal sponsor of the bill as well, Senator Atta-Ullajan. So the clerk was good enough to reach out to you and to the senator. Regrettably, the senator was not available for Monday. And so we just decided that it would be a waste of the committee's time if we do not also have the opportunity to hear from Senator Atta-Ullajan. Yes, Mr. Chair.
I don't know if you're looking for a response, but I suspect Senator Atta-Ullajan would have preferred to see the bill proceed more quickly. But I mean, I think my views on this are well known. I just hope that in future, if meetings are canceled, there would be some consultation with other parties before we receive a cancellation notice. I'll leave it at that. But I think that at least that consultation and opportunity for input would be appreciated.
What I can say, Mr. Janice, is we're in no position to make judgment calls on behalf of Senator Atta-Ullajan. So we will endeavor to make sure that that the committee does devote time to your bill and Senator Atta-Ullajan's bill, and we look very much forward to having a robust discussion regarding the bill. Now, yes, Mr. Bergeron.
Est-ce que je comprends que nous n'avons pas...
Have I understood correctly that we do not have any online witnesses?
We do have Dr. For today? Yes, for both hours we do have witnesses.
OK, alors ma question tout simplement, c'est je veux bien...
So I just want to be sure that sound checks have been conducted and that they were successfully performed? Yes, absolutely.
Hours then? Yes, correct.
Autre question, Monsieur le Président.
Another question, Chair. We received an amended schedule which seems to say that we should be providing our witness list tomorrow. Have I missed something?
As the clerk advises, it's important, and this is important for all members to be aware of, As you know, we're trying to proceed with as many meetings as possible, but in order for that to happen, it is important that every member actually do provide the clerk with their list of witnesses for Haiti by end of day tomorrow. This is something we didn't have an opportunity to discuss in previous committee meetings, but I would ask that all members put it in their schedules and make sure that they do
Mais
get
vous
their...
êtes conscient, Monsieur le Président, que c'est extrêmement serré?
But Chair, you are aware that this is very tight?
Yes. So just for the benefit of all members again, next Monday, for the first hour, we will be hearing from Minister Sajjan regarding the flooding in Pakistan, but the second hour will be devoted to Haiti. Is that okay with everyone? Should we proceed with the witnesses?
OK, mais on va devoir faire avec.
Well, we'll have to live with that, but it seems to be an extremely tight time frame. It's most unusual to be asked for a witness list with a timeline that is so tight.
Apologies for that, Mr. Bergeron, but we're trying, and I should say a word of thank you to the clerk and to the analysts for moving forward with these meetings with immediate dispatch. We have generally provided them very little runway to organize these meetings, and they have consistently delivered. And I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause, but that's what happens when we're constantly behind on committee hearings. Okay. On that note, if we could proceed with our witnesses. Again, thank you ever so much for being with us. We will commence with Ms. Hannon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I would just like to clarify before I begin that as we're all from Global Affairs Canada, from the same organization, I have some prepared remarks on behalf of our organization, and my fellow witnesses do not have prepared remarks, so we can get into the questions even more quickly.
As you wish.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to speak to you today about the devastation caused by the floods in Pakistan, Canada's engagement, and Global Affairs Canada's response to the crisis in support of the people of Pakistan. Le Canada a une histoire de plus de 70 ans de coopération.
Canada has a history of over 70 years of fruitful cooperation with Pakistan. Our bilateral relationship with Pakistan is solid and supported by extensive interpersonal connections. Together, we face urgent global problems, such as the climate crisis and the post-COVID-19 economic recovery.
Pakistan is the 8th most climate change affected country in the world and is at significant risk of extreme weather events. Temperatures are expected to rise by 3 to 6 degrees Celsius in Pakistan by 2100, which is higher than the global average. Rainfall is predicted to have greater annual variability, and low-lying coastal areas are at risk from rising sea levels. Pakistan is considered to be a high-stress country for water availability since the Himalayan glaciers, Pakistan's largest freshwater source, are receding. Since mid-June of this year, heavy monsoon rainfall and floods in Pakistan have affected over 33 million people, left more than 20.6 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, and resulted in over 1,700 deaths. Since the first week of August this year, unprecedented amounts of water accumulated due to the above-normal rainfall, especially in Balochistan and Sindh, in particular, which surpassed the records of the past 62 years with a colossal 450% increase. While the floodwaters have begun to recede, approximately 37,000 square kilometers of land remains flooded across Pakistan, down from 42,000 square kilometers at the end of September. Le ministre s'est engagé à travailler aux côtés de la communauté.
The Minister has committed to work alongside the international community to provide urgent and vital assistance and recovery support to the most vulnerable people in Pakistan. The degree of damage caused by the flooding has compelled Canada to do its share, together with the international community, to meet the immediate and long-term needs. Minister Sajjan, Minister of International Development, traveled to Pakistan in early September 2022, from the 12th to the 14th of September, together with 3 members of Parliament: Iqra Khalid, Member of Parliament, Salma Zahid, MP, and Shafkat Ali. I would like to point out that my colleague with us today, Mr. Christopher Gibbons, was also accompanying Minister Sajjan in his Pakistan trip in September. This trip intended to indicate the support of Canada to the Pakistani people and to see how Canada could best play its role in response to the crisis. I'm sure the Minister will be sharing the details of what he saw and what he heard when he speaks next week.
On the August 29th, Canada initially responded by announcing $5 million in humanitarian assistance funding. Then, on the 13th of September, Canada increased its total announced flood assistance to Pakistan to $33 million. This figure includes a matching fund of $7.5 million. In addition, Canada also supported the deployment of a humanitarian expert to Pakistan through Canada's Deployment of Humanitarian Experts project within the Canadian Red Cross Society, and the mobilization of essential non-food items from Canada's humanitarian stockpiles in Dubai and Mississauga. On the 4th of October, the government of Pakistan and the United Nations jointly increased the Pakistan flood appeal from $160 million to $816 million. This was in response to the rising needs and scale of destruction caused by the current disaster. Over 2 million homes have been destroyed or damaged, forcing people to live under open skies, exposed to threats of dengue, malaria, and the impacts of weather. More than 1,500 health and support facilities were badly damaged, as were 13,000 kilometers of roads, making it difficult and sometimes impossible to reach families and communities in need. Récemment, le 14 octobre, des représentants
Recently, on October the 14th, Canadian representatives participated in a high-level roundtable organized by the World Bank in Washington to discuss the ways of responding to the consequences of the catastrophic flooding in Pakistan. As far as next steps, the World Bank, the United Nations Development Programme, the Asian Development Bank, the Pakistani government, and the European Union have committed to preparing a post-disaster assessment of needs so as to provide a first impact assessment of the 2022 flooding consequences. The situation is still developing.
Assessment, once available, will detail the physical damages, economic losses, and costs of meeting the recovery needs of Pakistan. Canada will continue to align our relief and recovery assistance to the identified needs of the most vulnerable, other international donors, the government of Pakistan, and the United Nations on how best to support the vulnerable populations affected by the floods in Pakistan. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hannan. I should say, again, just for the benefit of all members, I will repeat what the position of each one of our witnesses are. Ms. Hannan is the Director General of the South Asia Bureau. Mr. Gibbons is the Executive Director of the Afghanistan-Pakistan Division and was with the Minister when he visited Pakistan. And Ms. Carney is the Acting Director General of the International Humanitarian Assistance Bureau. So with that, we will now proceed with questions from the members. Mr. Jenness, you are first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a very important issue, very important study. And I was pleased that our party was able to push for more hearings on this because I think this is an issue we really need to explore and ask some questions about. I want to start by drilling into the issue of the matching programs for humanitarian assistance that the government operates. This has been an issue that I've continually raised in response to other humanitarian crises. The fact that this government has made a pattern of introducing matching programs which only apply to certain charitable organizations and not others. The effect of this, and I anticipate some of the testimony we're going to hear in the second hour, is that organizations who are present, active, on the ground, have a high degree of capacity, are are not only shut out from the benefits of the matching program, they actually have a much harder time raising money because their donors come to them and say, how come the government of Canada is matching these organizations and not these other organizations? And in other words, the policy of the government in terms of arbitrarily matching some organizations and not others causes potential reputational damage for these organizations that are present and are doing good work. Now, I've raised this before on Lebanon, on Ukraine. We spoke about it in the context of a matching program the government announced in Atlantic Canada. I don't know if those concerns raised by parliamentarians and by the community at large are being heard at all. But again, we have a case here where the government is selectively matching donations to some organizations and not others, and that actually does a great deal of damage, especially to many small and diaspora community-led organizations. What's going on here? I mean, why hasn't there been a responsiveness to the concerns raised, and why this persistence in matching contributions to some organizations and not others?
Mr. Chair, for questions related to the humanitarian assistance program, I'm going to turn to my colleague Tara, who is responsible for this area within Global Affairs.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. With regards to matching funds, they are an important tool for Canada as it responds to a natural disaster, particularly in terms of engaging Canadians, which is why we've actually pre-established matching fund mechanisms with select partners who are indeed experienced humanitarian partners who directly implement on the ground. And what this actually does, a matching fund such as this one through the Canadian Humanitarian Coalition, which includes 12 key humanitarian partners, as well as the networks that fall behind them, such as the CFGB, the Canadian Food Grains Bank, which has an extensive network of smaller organizations underneath its umbrella. And what the matching fund does allow us to do, though there are some limitations to it, it allows us to respond very quickly and timely because the due diligence and back-end operations on these organizations have already been done. It also allows us to one-to-one match Canadians' donations so that they know if they give $1, that we will equally give $1 back to the organization which has raised the funds. Matching fund mechanism is also a really important piece to allow us to respond in a timely way so that we are not delayed as fundraising efforts continue across.
Mr. Chair, to the witness, I mean, respectfully, you didn't really answer my question. I agree with you that matching programs are wonderful in principle, but there's a specific problem when you exclude some organizations, and I agree that the organizations that are beneficiaries of this program are doing great work. But if you offered a social program to people in one province or not another, or people with one hair color and not another, people would understandably object. So why do you have a matching program that by design excludes other organizations that are doing good work, and in many cases it's small diaspora-led organizations with a significant footprint on the ground that are being left out in favor of established partners of the government, but in effect larger organizations that have the pre-existing relations with government, as opposed to some of these smaller organizations that are still very active present. Why? You know, I guess maybe can you take another run at answering my question and explaining why the government isn't looking for alternatives to be more inclusive here?
So the matching fund mechanism as it currently stands is actually built on lessons learned from previous attempts to engage on humanitarian assistance within the Canadian population. Our goal when there's a natural disaster is really to ensure that timeliness of funding reaching the populations most affected on the ground. And in order to do this, we need to be able to have a mechanism that is ready to be enrolled more or less at the press of a button, and to be able to actually then, once fundraising is complete, get the money out the door in very short order. In years past, there were mechanisms that actually allowed for a broader reach of a matching fund, so that there was a a broader partnership level of people that were able to donate organizations. And what that resulted in is in significant delays in getting funding out to the people most affected by the crisis. Sometimes, in fact, with money rolling out long past the onset of the
I'm
crisis.
almost done, but could you share evidence of that with the committee in writing?
I'm afraid you're out of time, Mr.
Ms.
Janis.
just a
It
yes
is
or no.
Over 6 minutes, Mr. Janis. You're out of time.
I hope you can share some written evidence with the committee on that.
So we next go to MP Sarai. Mr. Sarai, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you. I'm glad, Mr. Gibbons, you actually visited there. We have a considerable diaspora of Pakistani Canadians that are in my riding. We're very concerned, as well as a lot of people from the Punjabi diaspora in general who hail from that region. What I wanted to know, we all know it's because of climate change, but to what degree did climate change impact the extent and devastation of the flooding in Pakistan? To any one of you, Ms. Hannan or Mr.
Thank you for the question. I think I will turn to my colleague, Christopher, to answer the question, to what extent, if I understand correctly, to what extent did climate change impact?
Yes.
Was it, please?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. So, to quite a significant degree, as the opening remarks commented, the increased rainfall was far and above, significantly above what has been experienced in the past, and it's increasing. That is also accompanied with the glacial. The Himalayan glaciers are melting, so that's adding also to the downflow. And so it also, because of the volume of rainfall, the ground was completely and utterly saturated, which is why there's still so much that remains inundated and will remain so for quite an extended period. So I think it's fair to say that climate change is a significant factor. There's other factors as well. I think any country that would receive that much rainfall, the infrastructure just wasn't able to endure those consequences. And so that's obviously something that we collectively are globally are having to address. And that was certainly a challenge and is a challenge for Pakistan also. Thank you.
And on that same length, we know obviously climate change and reducing greenhouse emissions will help that, but that's a global thing. How can Canada help Pakistan on infrastructure to mitigate such damages in the future, whether it's dikes, flood zones, controlled zones, or dams or diking?
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I think that question is going to be a huge challenge for the international community just because of the scale of it. As we noted in the opening remarks, also the needs assessment is still being undertaken, and we're all awaiting that eagerly, and it's being done in close collaboration and review and finalization with the government of Pakistan, so it actually aligns with their assessment of what those needs are. There are a number of global funds to which Canada contributes, which will be able to initially start to address some of those immediate infrastructure challenges. And Canada will be very much part of those conversations, whether the World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, or the IMF. Thank you.
And do you know if any of Canada's $5.3 billion that's for international climate finance being delivered to Pakistan, or if any application for that has been made?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not aware of any applications, but I do know that Pakistan is eligible to apply for those funds. Definitely is one of the countries identified in the top rank eligible, in line in part because of their climate vulnerability. Thank you.
On August 17th, I think Minister Joly spoke with Minister Bhutto Zardari. How was the first interaction between the ministers, and how would you describe our bilateral relations between Canada and Pakistan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The interaction was quite friendly. I can report that I was a listener to that call, and I think it was a very good start to an interaction with her counterpart. And in general, I mean, we have had relations with Pakistan for well over 70, I think we're celebrating 75 years of relations. And as two countries that cooperate in a number of fora, we enjoy good, healthy bilateral relations, and looking forward to continuing to support Pakistan through this very challenging time that they are experiencing due to the flooding. The world's attention is on Pakistan right now, and we are happy to be supporting Pakistan as a partner and friendly country.
Has Canada thought of sharing technology or engineering tactics? We have a huge watershed. I mean, Canada is one of the is built on primarily watershed areas, and has dealt with similar types of scenarios right as recently as Calgary and Alberta, and Abbotsford in British Columbia, on probably raising village levels or other types of scenarios. Has Canada offered to exchange technology and how they can mitigate risks of flooding in the future, and especially to livestock and human and agricultural needs?
Mr. Chair, certainly I can confirm that through our Trade Commissioner Service, who's active on the ground in Pakistan, definitely they're engaging with government and private sector in Pakistan on offering technologies and experience and know-how from Canada that could help to address these challenging areas. There's always an annual process of determining what are the target and the most useful areas where we could offer some assistance. And so that is definitely factored into our annual business planning and the priority sectors for engaging and trying to bring the right kind of Canadian expertise to bear on the problems that Pakistan is facing.
Thank you.
Thank you, MP Sarai. We now go to Monsieur Bergeron.
Merci, Monsieur le
have 6
Président.
minutes.
Merci à nos...
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here to enlighten us regarding the situation which was the case and which is currently the case in Pakistan. On August 26, 2022, the government of Pakistan declared a national emergency as a response to the great floods. In addition to the ravages of these floods, Pakistan was dealing with political instability and an economic crisis since Imran Khan was ousted from power after losing a confidence vote in April 2022. My question is very simple. How has the flooding increased the economic crisis and political instability, or is it the reverse? Is Pakistan's political instability something that has harmed the ability to deal with these floodings?
Monsieur le Président.
Chair, as far as that question is concerned, of course, the Canadian government notes the challenges that Pakistan is currently facing economically and politically. We do not really have any comment to make on the way in which the people of Pakistan are going to respond and how they're going to move forward in order to determine their future. Clearly, a country confronted by many different problems at the same time is going to face a greater challenge to overcome these. To date, what we have observed is that despite all of these challenges, which are happening at roughly the same time, the government is continuing to function and is continuing to fulfill their duties. And so with assistance, of course, they've requested a lot of international assistance to be able to respond to the flooding. I do not see any causal relationship between the flooding and the political and economic situation referred to. We know that this is a very difficult time, but the Pakistani government is continuing to engage with the international community and to respond effectively. Thank you, Chair. Please understand, I never intended to imply that there was any causal relationship. On the contrary, I simply wanted you to enlighten us regarding the impacts of the flooding on political instability and the economic crisis, or the reverse, the impacts of the economic crisis and political instability on the country's response to the natural phenomena. I see that there is an understandable malaise in committing yourself on those terms. According to Climate Risk, Pakistan is among the 10 countries in the world, as you've mentioned, to be the most climate change affected in terms of extreme weather events between 2000 and 2009. There's a quote here. Mr. Sajjan should work with Environment and Climate Change Minister to mobilize and provide climate funding so as to support the adaptation, mitigation, and resilience of developing countries, and specifically in supporting small island countries who are more exposed to climate emergencies. Has there been any follow-up to this part of the mandate letter? And if so, what follow-up concerns Pakistan specifically?
Premièrement, Monsieur le Président.
First of all, Chair, I would simply like to apologize if I had not correctly understood the previous question. And far be it from me to give an impression that there is a causal relationship. As far as the question about climate events and the mandate letter of Minister Sajjan, I would simply like to ask whether you could repeat the question to ensure that I actually understood it and that I have all the elements. Again, Chair, my question is, what follow-up was given to the provisions of Minister Sajjan's mandate letter? And if any follow-up has been given, what affects Pakistan specifically? Very well, thank you. I think it's been mentioned that Pakistan is one of the 6 countries in the world eligible for funding referred to as climate funding. This is an envelope of $2.6 billion. One of the actions that we have taken to ensure that Pakistan is eligible, because we see that it is one of the most highly affected countries in the world when it comes to this climate event instability. I'm not sure whether my colleague wishes to elaborate. Chair, did you consider the fact that I had to repeat my question?
It's under 30 seconds, Mr. Gibbons.
Mr. Chair, I can simply add to that Pakistan has 3 approved Green Climate Fund projects for a total of $120 million USD in financing focused on flood risk reduction. That's it.
Merci.
We now go to Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to thank our guests for being with us today. Thank you for sharing this information with us. I'm going to follow up on some of the questions with regards to the climate funding, because I do think that, we all know that this was a direct impact of climate change, and that this is not going to be the last time we see climate emergencies happening. And so, of course, as parliamentarians, as Canadians, we don't want to be on our heels responding. We want to be more proactive on this. Could you tell me a little bit about the climate funding? And in particular, what I'd like to know is, of that, for example, the $2.6 billion, how much of that has been allocated and how much of that has been spent? And if you could share with me the eligibility for applying for that, what is the size of project that is required for that? And then just to add on to that, if you could also tell me how much of that is being spent for bilateral, multilateral, local, or Canadian CSO. Thank you. It's like 7 questions in one.
Mr. Chair, yes, it's a multi-phase question, so I will try to be as detailed as possible. I will say to start off that the $2.65 billion climate finance commitment that Canada has made is of course delivered in partnership and through multilateral partners like the World Bank. So I'll try to address the questions about what Canada has done specifically. So the 2.65 billion climate finance commitment to developing countries has been delivered through regional and multilateral initiatives. I can give an example of 200 million to the second phase of the Canadian Private Sector Fund at the Asian Development Bank, which aims to mobilize private sector support for climate action in Asian and Pacific countries, and that would not otherwise happen due to market barriers. Pakistan is eligible to receive support through this fund in areas like renewable energy, energy efficiency, agriculture, water management, and etc.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. I just want to make sure I'm clear here. So the financing, the climate financing that the Government of Canada provides is only provided through World Bank or through other multilateral institutions?
It's provided through regional and multilateral initiatives. So
there is
including
no finance funding available for Canadian CSOs?
So the majority of our climate finance commitment was designed in the beginning to be delivered multilaterally, and it didn't include direct bilateral support to Pakistan. We do have other direct bilateral support to Pakistan, but this particular envelope was, from the beginning, designed to be delivered multilaterally.
Are there any envelopes that are developed for Canadian CSOs, for Canadian organizations?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay, thank you. And are there any funds, climate adaptation funds, that are eligible, that Canada gives, that would be eligible for smaller projects, say 200 million, or sorry, not 200 million, say 2 million or 5 million, anything that would engage more with local CSOs or local organizations?
Well, I can cite our contribution to the Green Climate Fund, which is the world's largest fund to support developing countries in realizing their nationally determined contributions towards low-emission and climate-resilient future. Pakistan has 3 approved projects under this Green Climate Fund for a total of 120 million USD, so I can imagine each of them is below that amount. And it focuses on flood risk reduction, water management, and zero emissions rapid transit.
So, sorry to interrupt again, but I have such limited time. So I just want to make sure that this is clear. So these are all delivered through other organizations. So Canadian funds are given to other organizations to deliver them. Do we have any ability or any insight into how those funds, do we direct them in any way? And also, do we have any way of ensuring that they align with our feminist international assistance policy?
We actually have very strict monitoring and performance management standards, and we have we are definitely following certain criteria, including adherence to the feminist international assistance policy, so that any assistance delivered from Canada through these multilateral organizations is tracked and ensuring that reported on.
Okay.
Yeah.
One other thing that I'll just ask, I know I'm going to run out of time, but the Canadian Coalition on Climate Change and Development commissioned a paper in 2020. One of the things that they talked about is the vital need for Canada's climate commitments, our adaptation and mitigation commitments, to be on top of our ODA commitments, that there be some additionality to that, because of course this is an additional issue that we are dealing with as a global community. Has there been any discussions on our climate commitments being in addition to our ODA commitments? Our ODA, of course, are extremely low. I think it's still at under 0.3%, if I'm not mistaken.
Mr. Chair, I am not aware of discussions about commitments in addition to official and development assistance. And if my colleague is also unable to confirm, I'm afraid we would have to check and come back to the committee on that question.
Okay, and could I just ask one last final question then?
Out of time, Ms.
sorry.
McPherson.
I could have gone all day.
But thank you, Ms. Hannan, for undertaking to provide that additional information. We now go to the second round of questioning. Each member will be given 4 minutes. The first person up is MP Hoback.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here in person. It's so nice to see you here. I got two range of questions. One is during the flooding activity and our response time, and then one post-flood in realities of the combination of what's happened on the ground, loss of crops, things like that. So during the flooding time, did we have our assets in place to possibly help as best as possible? When you talk about climate crisis and the forecast like 3 to 6%, or 3 to 6 degrees increases, are we really looking at where we got assets to located around the world to make sure that we can respond to areas of high risk for events like this happening in the future?
Mr. Chair, I want to make sure that I understand the question about Canada having its assets in place.
Equation.
So, of course, Canada has representatives on the ground who are based at our mission in Islamabad, and they are watching the situation as it evolves. This flood is of such a catastrophic nature, and of course it was an evolving situation, and it continues to impact the country, knowing that still several tens of thousands of square kilometers are flooded. I would say that the real-time reaction and the quite quick action to respond to the floods is something that marked our action in terms of days, not weeks, because this was a situation that demanded quick action, and I'm not sure that answers the question fully.
Just maybe I can clarify. A little awkward here. What I want to make sure is Canada's, whether it's the DART team or other groups, the military, has the ability to get to that rapid response, and are we re-looking at things globally in light of climate change to make sure we got them in the appropriate locations? For example, hurricane response out of Panama. If we're going to see more flooding out of Asia, should we be putting more assets in a region somewhere in that area? Or are you looking at that?
I feel like my colleague Christopher is ready to take this question.
It has to be
and
very
to
short. I
respond.
apologize.
Yeah.
I only got 4 minutes. So.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In the immediate response, the government of Afghanistan was extremely well equipped, and they did not ask for any international immediate assistance such as DART. And when the DART is deployed, it's always based on a request for assistance. Okay. And in this case, the Pakistan military were actually and the civilian firmly interlinked to respond to the crisis in the immediate.
Okay, so then my next question, I've got reports here, some 800,000 cattle loss. The rice crop, which they're the fourth largest global exporter of rice, is lost. Wheat is possibly lost. So as we look at the world crisis in food, how is this impacting globally? And then when I look at their debt situation with the IMF, and the IMF coming out with a bailout package, but then putting in some strict requirements in regards to get that bailout package, is Pakistan actually going to be able to feed itself going forward? And what are the domino effects of them not having a crop as it associates to Africa and surrounding areas?
Thank you. So the global impact is of course, quite devastating. And as I mentioned in the opening remarks, there is at the moment a study being undertaken just to understand what is the extent of the damage overall, because this will be long-ranging. We're talking 13,000 kilometers of roads and many crops that were lost at a time when food insecurity is heightened because of situations beyond Pakistan's borders, the Russian-Ukraine conflict in chief among them. And Pakistan being one of the top 10 food insecure nations in the world, this is definitely a global impact that has not yet been measured because it's not yet possible to understand the extent of the damage. In terms of the IMF bailout and the domino effect that this may have on Pakistan, I think that it remains to be adequately studied, whether Pakistan will have a more solid economic place from which to continue to negotiate. But this is really part of the challenge facing Pakistan right now, and we are trying to focus on the humanitarian relief and the ongoing support that will help Pakistan come back to a place where they're able to engage with the international community and to show that they are delivering on at least the commitments that they made already.
Just a quick comment on that.
Thank you. Mr. Hobeck, you're considerably over your time.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So we next go to Dr. Fry. Dr. Fry, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I wanted to pick up on some of the questions that were asked earlier on in terms of the fact that we know that climate change is going to keep impacting Pakistan. There's going to continue to be floods. There are continuing to be problems at that level. So what are we doing to look at resilience, to look at how we build structures that will not allow for this to happen? That's the first question. But the one that concerns me a lot is the fact that, as we know, when there's flooding, there are fecal-borne infections and mosquito-borne infections. So we see dengue and we see cholera, etc. Is there an immunization program being rolled out to help to immunize people in this part of the world? And thirdly, women tend to be impacted a great deal. In many of those countries, floods and the lack of infrastructure often do not allow people in the rainy season, never mind the flood, to be able to access clinics, to be able to access reproductive health care, to be able to have babies, to be able to get the kind of help that they need. Now, what are we going to do to look at resilience in that region? Or do we have to wait until every time there is a flood and every time there is a problem to sort of do this quick mitigation, this emergency thing, but not build to prevent it for the future, not to build infrastructure and to create resilience?
Mr.
Apologies for jumping in before officials provide an answer. As you will notice, the bells are ringing and the lights are flashing. So do we have unanimous consent to go till 5 minutes before the vote?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, now we can go back to the officials for their response. Thank you.
I hope you stopped your clock, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I did.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I believe that the question illustrates a number of the multifaceted impacts and the ways that it is extremely important to prevent and to act before things are at a crisis level. And in fact, Canada's overall bilateral assistance program for Pakistan, which has been in place for many years, aims to do just that. So thank you for the opportunity to highlight the continuing challenges. Were there before the floods, and they are there exacerbated by the floods, but they will continue to be a challenge. So Canada, in fact, does have specific bilateral assistance to address things like the challenge faced by polio. That is one program that we do support with financial assistance, and recognizing the particular impact that this crisis, but some of the ongoing challenges associated with the development profile of Pakistan. We do recognize that it has a higher impact on women, and there are sort of multifaceted approaches that are used in order to address those, including through the Canada Fund for Local Initiatives.
Sorry, excuse me. I don't have a lot of time, so I just wanted a couple of basic questions answered. Are we going to look at helping to build health infrastructure that would help clinics where women can go and deliver their babies and to have that kind of need attended to? And are we looking at infrastructure with regard to electricity so that we can have lights and we can have intravenous drips for people who need them? And are we looking at immunization to prevent these kinds of diseases from happening in the future? So there's a health component that I want to find out about.
Do we have?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So health is fundamental to our development assistance program currently. It's an integral part of any humanitarian response, and is also going to be integral to the assessments that are underway currently. And they're also always, for Canada, but also for the UN, done through a very clear gendered lens, that is to say, recognition that women and girls are particularly affected at times of crisis, and just generally in terms of situations of poverty and challenge. Thank you.
Thank you kindly for that. We next go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. We know that on June 30th, 2022, Pakistan had nearly 1.3 million Afghan refugees registered according to the United Nations. Can you enlighten us as to the situation of these Afghan refugees in Pakistan?
Monsieur le Président, donc...
Mr. Chair, Our engagement with and commitment with Pakistan includes a focus on the situation of the Afghans who are based in Pakistan. It's part of our commitment to work and to continue to negotiate with Pakistan to address the barriers for the movement from Afghanistan with the Safe Passage program. I can say that in terms of Canada's commitment to bring 40,000 Afghans, we have already received over 21,000 Afghan refugees. And a large number of these refugees transited through Pakistan because that was the way out. That was to date, the most probable way. And it was one of the possibilities. And many people did go through Pakistan. And we worked closely with the government of Pakistan to bring these people to Canada.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to piggyback on the first question that Mr. Genuis asked. I'd like to know, how did the matching come about in terms of what the Canadian government was prepared to pay to match Canadians' donations during the period from August the 1st to September 28, 2022? Why stop it at the 28th of September 2022?
Less than 15 seconds, please.
The matching fund time period was determined in consultation with partners. It was backdated to what was effectively the onset of the calamity portion of the monsoon rain seasons, with the goal being we always try to do matching funds that are within a period that allows for that really active engagement with Canadians to mobilize their funding.
Thank you, Ms. Carney. Very grateful. We now go to Ms. McPherson. You have 2 minutes, Ms. McPherson.
Thank you very much. I'd like to follow up on one of the comments you made, Mr. Gibbons, on the aid that has been delivered to Pakistan and the lens of the Feminist International Assistance Policy being used. How is that being done? How are you ensuring that that's happening? And what mechanisms are in place to ensure that there is some accountability for that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So any agreement that we have with any implementing partner is very rigorously drawn out and negotiated in many respects, and it includes always those kinds of gender qualifications and amongst others. And built into that is also strong monitoring mechanisms, whether that's our development team on the ground who go regularly to sites and interact with the implementers, as well as very often there'll be even audits undertaken. And then before the final disbursement is made is confirming that all of those indicators are met, whether they're gendered, financial, or otherwise.
Thank you. And then one last question very quickly. You know, we know Pakistan, and this was a question that was asked earlier, but we know that Pakistan is dealing with enormous debt burden. Would it not be useful for Canada to also play a role in helping to alleviate that debt burden? It is one thing to give funds for humanitarian assistance, but it is in the long term, in terms of building the country up so that they are able to withstand future disasters, ensuring that they actually have the funds available to do that. Debt relief is a key role. What role is Canada playing, and what role can Canada play?
Mr. Chair, on this question, I think it would be difficult for us to go beyond the remit that the department has, and if I might suggest, we're working within the lanes of the policy that is established, and we might be providing advice on policy, but I think it would be going beyond my remit to comment on things that we should be doing in the future, and perhaps the minister would be better placed to comment on this question.
I will ask the minister.
We now go back to Mr. Hoback. Mr. Hoback, you have 4 minutes.
And thank you, Chair. And again, just down that same line, then you're saying it's a policy decision on whether we want to interview with the IMF and the what they put in for conditions. Like, I know the Arab countries have basically restructured debt repayments differently so that they've given them a break so they could use that money internally. Is that something Canada would consider? Would that be considered a policy question for the minister?
I will just stick to the facts on this one, and I'm not aware of any discussions of Canada considering restructuring debt repayments to the IMF, this large multilateral organization. I think it's something that would have to be considered very carefully with a lot of like-minded nations. It's not something that Canada would be considering doing alone.
Okay. You mentioned that Minister Sejan went in September to the region with some other Liberal MPs. Was that paid for by the department?
The minister, as far as I am aware, has a budget for travel, being international development minister, and was working within the allocations that are provided to the Minister of International Development, along with his portfolio, to engage with partners and in situations around the world.
Again, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Then, in a scenario like this, why wasn't members of the opposition included in a delegation with the minister? Why was it only Liberal members?
I'm afraid those questions are not ones that I am able to answer,
Fair.
and I don't think that the decision was about which members were included in the minister's delegation is one on which Global Affairs provided advice.
Okay, because for us in the opposition, it would really help us question you if we had been on the ground like some of the members of the Liberal Party. So I feel disadvantaged in that scenario. Back to looking forward, we're going to see starvation, we're going to see hunger, but then we also have to look at the situation. We're going to have to help rebuild the agriculture sector. Canada's very good at doing that. So what would be done at this point in time within Global Affairs to start putting in place Canadian expertise and Canadian groups to go and assist them in rebuilding the agriculture sector?
Mr. Chair, it is great to look forward and to think about rebuilding. It's a very important aspect of the overall response. And I'm certain that going forward, the opportunities to assist in ways that are practical and take advantage of the know-how and the expertise that Canada has is something that we are actively engaging on, especially through our High Commission and the staff that are there on the ground, who have an opportunity to engage on a day-to-day basis with officials and civil society and everyone in Pakistan to determine what the needs are. And they're quite focused in reaching back to Canada for that kind of assistance. We will certainly be supportive going forward to encourage those kinds of very practical linkages and partnerships to address this
So there's
situation.
no formal examples of things in place. It's still too early.
I will just say that I think until we understand the overall needs, it's difficult to say that we've got programs. It's quite soon to talk about specific programs to address when we're still assessing the scale of the damage, and the immediate response has really been focused on those situations that are the most dire rather than choosing new programs.
Just one quick question then. When you see a scenario like we see in Pakistan now where people are going to be hungry and you're going to see different groups coming in with different alternative motives to try to influence people with food, will that destabilize the region? Do we see the possibility of having more, I'm not sure what the right word is, I'll just say groups radicalizing people through food and distributing radicalized ideas through food? Do you see that destabilizing the area even more?
Mr. Chair, I think that in any natural disaster and destabilizing situation, there is the possibility for internally displaced people and those who are long-term displaced from their usual social networks to turn to radicalization. And it's certainly an area that we are concerned with and following, and we aim to address through other channels of our engagement with the country. So security aspects are certainly not something that we are unaware of, and attempt to address with other types of engagement that we undertake on a regular basis with Pakistan in particular.
I'm done.
We now go to MP Zaid You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to our witnesses, our officials, for appearing before the committee today. Pakistan is experiencing very challenging times, and I was part of the delegation under the leadership of Minister Sarjan in September, and I've seen firsthand the extent of the damage. You mentioned that needs assessments is being done. And you quoted a figure of $816 million also, that some sort of assessment has been done. Still, many parts of Pakistan, the water has not receded. And when I traveled to the province of Sindh, especially Dadu district, that was all underwater. People are living in schools, kids are not going to school, where majority of the families are dependent upon the farming. Like this year, they have not been able to plant the crop, which was the seeds were supposed to go in late September, early October. So a lot of winter is approaching. People have lost their houses. So what role Canada can play to make sure that the needs assessment is done and we can provide some sort of technological help to Pakistan to see if there is any technique that we can help them to help recede the water. Because in Sindh, in parts of KPK, the water has receded. It did the damage, but it's not there. But especially in Sindh, where water is not receding, what can be done? Have someone looked into it, that what can be done to provide help to Pakistan to make sure that that water can recede, so at least the farmers can, the redevelopment process can start to happen.
Mr. Chair, for this question, I believe it is still in the overall zone of our humanitarian response. So I think my colleague is better placed to address your question.
So in terms of needs assessments from a humanitarian perspective, in order to actually develop the appeal that was referenced, the $816 million, humanitarian actors came together and actually did complete the immediate response assessment, which is what's allowed them to reach that figure to address those needs. That money does go from until May 2023. So it looks at the needs in the immediate, but also the relief needs that are going to be needed from January to May. And as part of that, what has been done, Canada has supported a number of humanitarian partners with unearmarked funding that allows them to continue to use that money as water recedes and areas become accessible. They will go in and help provide some of those populations with some of the services and relief items that they haven't been able to access in their home locations yet. Coupled with that is the ability to respond to winter, which has been factored in. As the needs assessments were done, the humanitarian community was not unaware that winter was approaching, and that certainly humanitarian needs do shift as temperatures drop.
One quick question in regards to the medical needs, because these parts of Pakistan where water is still there, it's giving rise to waterborne diseases like dengue, typhoid, malaria, and with medications not being there, I was told in Dadu that 60,000 women have to deliver babies. So is there any drive being done to make sure that we can provide appropriate medications which are being needed in Pakistan to provide some help on that?
So generally speaking, I think as my colleague Christopher has mentioned, health is addressed is very fundamental to our development assistance. But I think the question is in the immediate response within our humanitarian response, whether access to medication is being considered, if I'm correct. So again, to my colleague Tara.
From the humanitarian perspective, this is a crisis where the WHO actually did go in for this very reason quite early and released funds, $10 million from the contingency fund for emergencies, to which Canada is a donor annually. So the multilateral system will be providing some of this waterborne disease response that's going to be needed. Equally, we have provided direct support to the International Federation of the Red Crescent via the Canadian Red Cross, which will provide some emergency immediate health-related response in country.
Thank you.
very much. That concludes our first panel of witnesses. Allow me to thank you for not only for your remarks, but for your expertise. It will certainly come in very handy for us. So before I suspend this session, we will be returning with representatives from various organizations in the next hour as soon as voting has concluded in the chamber. Thank you. Sorry. If we could resume our second hour of hearing from witnesses for the flooding in Pakistan. We are very, very honored to have with us four different witnesses. First, we have Mr. Sharif, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Aga Khan Foundation, who's here with us in person. Welcome. We're also fortunate to have three additional stellar witnesses. We have Mr. Rahul Singh from Global Medic. We have Dr. Aslam Dawood, who is the chairman of Humanity First. And we also have Mr. Osama Khan, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Islamic Relief Canada. So welcome to you all. You will each be provided 5 minutes to provide us with your remarks and observations, after which we will proceed to questions from the members. Now, we have exactly an hour. An hour? Yes, starting now.
On peut avoir la salle et
We can have the room and everybody for, yes? Okay, good.
For the purposes of our witnesses, if I hold this yellow pad up, that means you only have 1 minute remaining for your remarks. In addition to that, if I do hold it up when you're answering questions, that means please try to wrap it up as soon as possible. Yes, correct. So since Mr. Sharif is here, we will start off with Mr. Sharif, and then Mr. Singh, Mr. Dr. Dawood, and Mr. Khan. Mr. Sharif, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I will absolutely be brief because I think we'll get lots of insight from my colleagues who are online as well. Let me just thank the committee, first of all, for turning their attention to this really serious crisis. I won't spend any time now rehearsing the scope and scale of it here. I think you've heard from officials, and I think you know, even from the press reports, what an unprecedented crisis this is for Pakistan. Let me just say a word about the Aga Khan Foundation Canada and its response so far. The foundation is part of a global family of institutions known as the Aga Khan Development Network, and we have had a very, very long presence in Pakistan. In fact, I would characterize our response as deeply locally rooted and globally connected, and I think that's part of the strength that we bring to the response. We have been working very closely with the government of Pakistan and with the government of the various provinces affected to respond to the crisis in a variety of ways. Let me just give you a couple of examples. The Aga Khan University, which is the country's top health sciences university, has been responding to the extensive health needs emerging from the flooding. Dr. Fry talked about this in the previous session, having served over 300,000 patients across Sindh, Baluchistan, Punjab, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The Aga Khan Agency for Habitat has been working with hundreds of teams of volunteers to respond from a community basis to evacuate 10,000 people, supporting thousands of households and food assistance and dewatering across Sindh and Chitral and Gilgit-Baltistan. So the response has tried to harness every capacity we have in the country that's been necessary. I want to express our gratitude to Minister Sajjan, who made it an early priority, frankly, to travel to Pakistan to see firsthand the effects of the flood, and not only in the very significantly affected populated areas, but also to make time to visit some of the more remote areas to see the effect of the floods, really to understand its national scope and its impact. Maybe what I might do very, very briefly, just offer three thoughts about how donors might respond, what kind of design principles the situation demands. So the first principle I would offer is the need for a lot of flexibility in the framework of our assistance. And I say that because what we're likely to see, in fact, what we are seeing is a multidimensional crisis. So on the one hand, what we'll see is urgent humanitarian assistance, early recovery, and reconstruction needs occurring simultaneously. Because, as you know, there are still parts of the country which are underwater.
There are some parts of the country which have just recently where the water has receded, and there are other parts of the country where, in fact, some reconstruction work is now possible. So these situations are going to exist simultaneously, and we're going to need to be able to respond to them simultaneously. But it's also multidimensional in the sense of, I think, the discussion you had in the previous session. We've got massive agricultural impact. We have a health system under massive stress at a time when the needs are very severe. We have an educational crisis, which has been compounded now after the crisis of COVID. And like in all crisis situations, we have a gender equality crisis because the situation of women and girls in a humanitarian crisis like the one we are witnessing is going to be, of course, the most vulnerable. So we're going to need to have a lot of flexibility, not only in terms of the stage of recovery that we're responding to simultaneously, as well as the dimensions and sectors along which we're ready to respond. The second principle is we're going to need to take a truly inclusive approach in our response and take into account the differing needs of different parts of the country. Look, this has been a national disaster. We have been witnessing the scale of the disaster in the populated parts of the country, Sindh and Punjab, Baluchistan. That's been very, very severe. But we shouldn't forget also that more remote and sparsely populated parts of the country have also been affected, and they will have their own needs. And so a truly inclusive response is going to require us to take into account the differing needs across the country. Winter, I think, was raised in the previous session. In the north, obviously, winterization has got to be a massive priority because that is already now with us. If you're in a remote and isolated part of the country, there's been massive damage to infrastructure, so connective infrastructure, roads, bridges, etc., are going to have to be a very significant priority. My third principle. Again, you've talked about this in the previous session, but as we look to the future, we really need to think about how we invest in preparedness and disaster risk reduction. And the plea I want to make is that we think about this also at a community level. Look, the first responders in every crisis situation in every part of the world are the communities who are affected themselves. They are also always the first people who are there. And the capacity of those communities, training, infrastructure investments, stockpiling, early warning systems, the things we can put into hands of the communities themselves as a result of this crisis will help equip them to deal with the crises that are invariably in front of us. So I will stop there, Mr. Chairman, with those three principles and look forward to the discussion with the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sharif. We now go to Mr. Singh from Global Medic. Mr. Singh, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You can hear me okay?
Absolutely. Loud and clear.
That's great. Thank you. The crisis unfolding in Pakistan is a humanitarian catastrophe. Global Medic has teams on the ground, installing water purification systems into villages, providing essential medicines to field hospitals to treat patients, distributing food rations, and providing thousands of families with family emergency kits, which include a point-of-use water purification unit to ensure that those families have access to clean drinking water. Unfortunately, the Government of Canada has implemented a policy that actually hurts the humanitarian sector, and by default, it hurts the very people that we as a sector are trying to help. The government has a policy of matching funds raised by humanitarian charities. The idea is to encourage Canadians to give by doubling their impact. Historically, the policy matched the funds raised by all responding agencies and created a pool of those funds, which then the government programmed. A few years ago, the government changed course and started appointing only one charity to be the matched partner. Matching funds given to only one entity actually come at the expense of the other charities in the sector. We know this because we receive calls and emails from donors that do not donate to us when they hear that the funds will not be matched. These are individuals who've previously donated to us and our organization, and because of this policy, we lose their support. The crisis in Pakistan is so large, we need a widespread approach. The policy hurts the broader sector who's responding and trying to help, and thereby hurts the very people who've been affected by the floods. This policy needs to be changed. It also leads to a few questions that should be answered. First, to a charity, a donor is like a customer. In this scenario, the government is using the force of its power to incentivize donors to give certain charities at the expense of others. Would the government ever provide a free matching airline ticket to customers buying on Air Canada but not WestJet? Would they provide a free cell phone to someone who bought a cell phone from Bell but not TELUS or Rogers? Of course not. The policy actually creates an uneven playing field. The government's job is not to create monopolies. Second, it's a very difficult time for the charitable sector, and a policy like this hurts smaller charities. Thus far, only 3 entities have been given the matched funding: the Red Cross, UNICEF, and the Humanitarian Coalition. To be clear, I am not disparaging the agencies. I'm calling out a bad policy. These entities are all large and have lobbyists. The public needs to understand if lobbying occurred to make this policy change. If it did, was the lobbying done fairly and appropriately? Was it declared? Was there a broader sector consultation? You should know that $157 million of funding has moved towards these 3 agencies in the past 5 years because of this policy. Now listen, if no lobbying occurred and the government chose to make an arbitrary decision, why was this done? Where was the broader sector consultation? Third, members of the Humanitarian Coalition make a contribution annually so that the coalition can operate. The members tend to be larger agencies, and the current requirement sets the bar at 10 million. It's hard to imagine our government would allow a program to exist whereby a charity would have to pay to join a group in order to access government funds. Pay for access programs are not appropriate. The last point I want to raise is that I've spoken to other members in the charitable sector, other leaders, and they share the concerns that I'm bringing, but they're hesitant to speak out because they're afraid of losing government funding and how it actually may impact their professional careers. This is not a good sign for a democratic country. The Canada we live in should not have the fear of speaking truth to power and calling out a bad policy. By incentivizing Canadians to give only to the Humanitarian Coalition, our government, the Canadian government, have hindered the ability of other agencies to help Pakistanis in their desperate moment of need. If you kept the old policy, dozens of humanitarian agencies would be working to rally their donors and create a larger movement of help. I want to be clear before I close. I'm not disparaging the work of other agencies. I'm not even requesting government funding. I'm requesting that this government stop taking funds away from smaller charities with this policy. As members of this committee, you have something that we as humanitarians don't. You have the power to stop this bad policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Singh. So now we go to Dr. Dawood. Dr. Dawood, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Chair and committee members. I will not go into describing the situation in Pakistan. My previous speakers have covered that and also in the previous session. The details and the statistics was given. I will introduce Humanity First, which is an international humanitarian aid agency with branches in 62 countries. Our Canadian headquarters is based in the city of Vaughan, Ontario. Humanity First provides emergency assistance using a global volunteer network, irrespective of race, gender, age, religion, or political affiliation. Since 1995, Humanity First has responded to over 190 emergencies in 99 countries and assisted around 2.5 million people affected by natural disasters, including major responses in Haiti, Bangladesh, and the Philippines. This is in addition to our other humanitarian programs. Since the start of flooding in Pakistan, Humanity First has continued to assist the victims of the flood. Humanity First has provided over 1.1 million meals, distributed thousands of care packs, helped tens of thousands of people with emergency supplies. We have held 68 medical camps where 101 doctors treated over 25,000 patients. Humanity First has given tents, mosquito nets, water purification tablets to the affected people. In fact, 3,395 volunteers have worked over 34,700 hours to help. Our long-term plan includes to build 500 homes for impacted families, continue our medical clinics, provide farmers with feed for their livestock, provide crop compensation and fertilizers for farmers. We also will be assisting with other needs such as education of children and psychosocial support. Like all other international organizations, Humanity First is also facing various challenges on the ground, including but not limited to safety and security of our volunteers, fund transfer process, and the inflation that is impacting not only Pakistan, Canada, but it's worldwide. However, the biggest challenge that Humanity First has faced was not on the ground in Pakistan. Rather, sadly, it is being faced in Canada, our homeland. I would like to bring to the attention of this committee how the launching of the matching fund has adversely impacted Humanity First and many other small Canadian NGOs. The Government of Canada announced funding of $30 million to help humanitarian partners provide life-saving services. Also, on September 13th, Canada launched a matching fund in which the government matched dollar-for-dollar donations made by individuals to Humanitarian Coalition and a couple of other organizations, which was matched up to a maximum of $7.5 million. Sadly, Humanity First did not receive any funding in the $30 million announced, or that we are not part of the matching fund. Now, what was the impact of that? Canadian donors are among the savviest people who want to ensure that the donation has the maximum impact. When they find out that the government is going to match their donation for certain organizations, they choose only those organizations to get the value of their donation doubled up. It definitely makes sense, as who would not like to complement their generosity by increasing the value of the donations. However, this unfair practice negatively impacts organizations like Humanity First in terms of less donations, resulting in shrinking of our response despite our potentials. Moreover, some donors take it as a credibility issue. They prefer and trust that those organizations that are funded by the government. We received numerous calls asking us, will the government match our donation? And when we said no, they did not donate to us. So we lost a substantial amount of donation, which could have been used by us in Pakistan. We rely on our donors to provide this help. The government completely ignored some key factors when deciding about matching funds, factors such as on-the-ground presence, past track record, availability of resources on the ground, volunteer base, and agility and nimbleness of the organizations. For example, Humanity First has a proven track record by being a trusted partner of the then CEDA when we responded to Typhoon Haiyan in 2014. We built over 400 homes and 2 schools in there with the help of the funding from the Government of Canada, a project that was successfully delivered by Humanity First on record. The fact that Humanity First has over 100 doctors and over 3,000 volunteers on the ground in Pakistan with the ability to reach out a wider population, and that we have already helping thousands of victims from our own resources was never considered by the government when deciding matching funds. I have only 2 recommendations. We recommend that the government should consider pre-qualifying a larger base and mix of large and small organizations as their trusted partners who are eligible and may automatically receive the government funding on the ground partner. And for matching funds, the government should impartially and universally match funds for all charitable organizations who receive donations for the particular cause and who are also active on the ground. I will end my submission by saying that it is never too late to change this unfair policy. There's an urgency for the need to help the people who are impacted, and aid delayed is aid denied. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dawood. We now go to Mr. Khan from the Islamic Relief Canada. Mr. Khan, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and the committee members for discussing the situation in Pakistan. Islamic Relief Canada is part of a global family, a global network. In Pakistan specifically, we've had our teams that have been active for more than 30 years. Currently, we have 400 staff members throughout the country, 100 specifically working in Balochistan. Islamic Relief Pakistan has so far reached more than 550,000 individuals in providing life-saving aid. I'd like to provide a first-hand account from August 17th to the 28th. I was on the ground in Pakistan, especially in Balochistan. This is a province that, even compared to the rest of the country, has already been lagging in terms of the infrastructure that's been there. Most of the areas that have been impacted by this flooding most half of Balochistan was already under extreme poverty. You're talking about 6 out of the 12 million individuals there already being in poverty. And what I saw on the ground, Chair, is people who not only had lost their homes, but and in some cases lost their lives, but a dignified way of earning a livelihood. Most of the rural parts of Pakistan rely either on agriculture or animal rearing. And because of really global warming and climate change, what's happened is even this area of Balochistan, just 2 months before the flooding, there was a severe drought. It hadn't rained there for a long period of time. And you go from drought-like conditions to excess rainfall where the infrastructure isn't there to manage all of the excess water. And more than 30 million people have been impacted, have lost the ability to provide a dignified livelihood for their families. And even when the cameras leave, when the media stops talking about the situation in Pakistan, we know and we fear that for many years down the line, the impact will still be there. This is larger impact than the earthquake and the floods that happened a decade ago. And Islamic Relief is doing what we can. We appreciate the government of Canada for initially announcing funds, rapid deployment funds of $5 million and $30 million. They've, because Islamic Relief has had a presence in Pakistan, $2 million was deployed through us. Islamic Relief is also part of the Humanitarian Coalition, a pre-vetted group that has received government funding in order to make sure that efficient, transparent, and effective aid can get to the people that are in most need. Canadians have been very generous in this crisis. I can report that just with our agency, just with Islamic Relief, we've raised $5.5 million since the start, since the middle of August, specifically for Pakistan. Canadians from coast to coast do care about the crisis and are willing, heeding the call of the matching funds to donate more. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I'd like to mention that we spoke about in the previous session about climate change. I think one element of this crisis is a country like Pakistan. When you look at their GDP and their debt financing, it is really handicapped by not being able to invest in climate-resistant infrastructure. An initiative that I saw on the ground, we talk about disaster risk reduction, is something as simple as a $5,000 flood wall that it's stones that you can build in strategic areas near the villages. The villagers showed me videos that when the floodwaters came, because we had done that intervention just 6 months ago, the waters bypassed their village and their homes and their crops were protected. So I think it's this type of climate resistance, disaster risk reduction, common sense types of initiatives that we need to empower both the NGOs and the governments to do more of. Both the IMF and the World Bank, in terms of multilaterals, I think Canada and some of the other nations have a responsibility to talk about how we can do debt swaps to make sure that the country is not burdened by debt repayments, but some of those external debts can be converted, forgiven and converted into climate resistance, climate adaptive interventions. As you know, that the ODA from Canada is extremely low. That's another area that we'd like the government to increase. But the needs will remain for the people of Pakistan, and it's our hope that we can be standing with the people of Pakistan because they have more than 5,000 to 6,000 glaciers in the north. Unfortunately, global warming and climate change will probably mean that we're having this conversation in the near future again with climate disasters. So it is an area of urgency. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. We will now go to the members for questions. If I could just ask the witnesses to slow down a bit in their responses. We heard from the interpreters. They were having a bit of a challenge keeping up with you. So would appreciate if you spoke a bit more slowly. So for the first question, we go to MP Epp. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. And I'll take your admonishment, Mr. Chair. I have that same problem of speaking too fast at times. So I'm relatively new to the committee, and so just in the interest of transparency, prior to being elected in 2019, I did serve and was employed by the Canadian Food Grains Bank for 5 years. So I want to put that on the record. And if my bias shows through, I'll apologize for that up front. I'll endeavor not to have that happen. I'd like to start, Mr. Khan, with what you just referenced in one of your closing comments. Canada's ODA is fairly low. We heard from testimony earlier that Canada's committed, I believe, $33 million to a UN estimate of $816 million immediate need. Can you comment how that compares to other countries?
I don't have the specific facts and figures, but we do know that Canada, while it has a reputation, a positive reputation throughout the world, we feel that it can do more. It can do more to help developing countries, countries like Pakistan, countries throughout Africa, to increase the amount of funding, not just through multilateral partners, but also directly with NGOs that are operating in those countries. I know there's a lot of work that happens in the sector. There's competing demands at home with Canadians and with inflationary pressures on the budget. But we feel that Canada should be doing more to meet some of the objectives that the expectation, frankly, there is for Canada to step up on the global stage.
Thank you, Mr. I'd like to go to a question to a number of the witnesses regarding on how your organizations work. And if you can be fairly short and succinct, but also tied over to the accountability back to your donors and to the Canadian government. My understanding is, or my question would be, do you work largely through local partners, or do you work largely with staff based from Canada? And how does that translate into the accountability back to your donors and back to the government of Canada? My understanding from past experience would be that working through organizations such as yours and to local partners is far more effective than government to government or bilateral, and then down through foreign governments to address disasters. So I'll stop talking, and let's start with Mr. Khan, and we'll go to Mr. Sharif next, please.
Thank you for the question. I think the CRA, for example, has a lot of requirements on Canadian charities when they're working with foreign projects, and I know there's been a lot of movement on that. But compared to multilateral, compared to the UN agencies, Canadian charities have a very stringent requirement on books and records, for example. Specifically for Islamic Relief, we do work, as I said, we have 400 staff throughout the country, so we work with the Islamic Relief global family, through Islamic Relief Worldwide, through our intermediary there.
Point of order. We have a translation problem.
Apologies, Mr. Khan.
No problem.
Because of the sound quality, so if you can start to speak again, Mr. Khan.
Yes, Mr. Khan, can you resume your remarks?
Sure. In terms of any government funding that's provided, there are reporting requirements back to the government on how the funds are spent, and with direction.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. I'm going to ask Mr. Sharif to chime in here as well. I apologize, my time is limited.
No problem.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Three quick answers. First, we work through local partners. Now, our Aga Khan Foundation in Pakistan is older than Aga Khan Foundation in Canada, so they're a local partner. It's all staff from the region. Secondly, I agree that, look, the government has to decide on the portfolio, multilateral, bilateral, and kind of civil society projects. They all have their own profile of strengths and weaknesses, but I would say that the accountability that you get when you fund and support Canadian institutions is orders of magnitude higher than anything we see from the other two categories. And the last thing I will say is that when we do work with local civil society institutions, Canadians, and all, we have to insist that they coordinate with the government. So it's not really and or, right? It has to be both. They have to be working closely with the governments in the region to ensure that they're coordinated and getting the most bang for their buck.
Thank you. I'd like to continue. We heard in the first round of first round of testimony from the officials that one of the reasons that there are pre-vetted organizations was for speed of response. So I'll ask Mr. Daoud and then followed by Mr. Singh to respond. How do you respond to that rationale for having matching funds only to pre-vetted organizations?
Yes, I totally agree with the idea of having a pre-vetted organizations, but sadly, pre-vetted organizations are not considered. For example, Humanity First was pre-vetted. We were partner organization. We have proven track record. We received funding for the response in Philippines, where we responded and built 400 homes and other projects that was also reviewed and audited by a third party. So that record is there. So whatever process for pre-vetting is, we are all for it. We agree to it. That should be done. Our nimbleness
Thank you, Mr. Daoud. I'm sorry, Mr. Singh.
Thank you so much. Listen, we are quick. We're always boots on the ground very quickly. We used to get funds from the government. We do not anymore. We don't even ask for their funds. I would ask you to go back and ask Ms. Carney if she ever considered the impact of her decision on how it would affect the sector and smaller charities, because it's very devastating.
Thank you. I'd like to get one more quick question into Mr.
I'm sorry, out of time. So we now go to MP Zahid.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for appearing before the committee, and thanks a lot for all the work which you are doing in this difficult time for Pakistan. So my first question is for Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan, you mentioned that you have 400 staff members working in Pakistan, and you have over 100 in the province of Balochistan. So what phase of the work you are in Pakistan? Is it just right now providing humanitarian assistance, or you have moved towards the redevelopment? Because especially in Balochistan, the winters can be very severe, and winter is approaching. So those who have lost their homes, has some redevelopment work started there, or as yet we are in the providing humanitarian assistance mode?
Thank you so much for that answer. I think even within the province, in different villages, you'll find different needs. Sometimes the water has not receded, so the needs of that community is much different. Whereas in some other villages, even at the village level, you will get into early recovery. We've also seen from the ground that there is an increase in waterborne diseases.
Interfering. Mr. Khan, it seems like it could very well be that your headphone is not connected to Zoom on the left-hand side of your screen. If you could just ensure that that is the case, because we're having problems. The interpreters are having problems hearing you.
Okay, is this better?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, the needs are different for even at the different village level. And in some cases, we've seen waterborne diseases. We've seen early recovery activities where we can in terms of livelihood recovery. So we give that flexibility to our teams on the ground who are directly working at the village level.
Are you part of the assessment process, in order to determine what the needs are and what should be the priorities?
Yes, absolutely. Our programs team here on a weekly basis is collaborating at a minimum on a weekly basis, collaborating with our team in Pakistan, and we do lean on their expert advice on what they're seeing to approve any allocation of the funding.
My next question is for Mr. Sharif. Mr. Sharif, you mentioned in regards to the medical camps you are having in different affected parts. So in those medical camps, how are you dealing with the medication shortages? Because when we went to Sindh, we saw that there was shortage of Panadol, for example, was not available there. So how you are working on and making sure that those medical camps have the appropriate medications needed?
Thank you for the question. It's an incredibly important question. There are shortages, and even getting stuff around the country, of course, has now become very difficult. There's no magic bullet here. We're doing what we can. In fact, because we are associated, those camps, the 300 or 400 camps that have been established across those 3 or 4 provinces are associated with the Aga Khan University Hospital. We're able to rely on the university hospital's stockpiles as well as its supply chain and purchasing capacity. But there are shortages, and they will. That's one of the things we're going to have to continue to deal with. We're going to have to work on supply and transport, both very, very important issues.
Have you determined like which medications are short of, like because like diseases like dengue, malaria, typhoid is on the rise, like especially in those areas where the water has not receded.
Yes.
So is there any determination, because I think there are many, like the diaspora here wants to do their part.
Yes.
So have you made some list like which type of medications are missing so that the appeal can be made for that?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think we definitely would have an assessment of that. We're working very closely with the provincial governments and the ministries of health to make sure that we are feeding into their registries and to the needs that they're articulating to the National Disaster Management Authority, as well as to the World Bank and UN processes that are trying to assess globally the challenge. So yes, that absolutely those are available.
One more question for Mr. Sharif, that in northern parts in Chitral and Gilgit, Skardu, has the water receded totally? Has the redevelopment work started there?
Winterization is in full scale now. It is now the biggest urgent issue, is to make sure that housing and shelter and general winterization takes place. So that's the priority right now. The water has mostly receded. There are some parts that are still dealing with those problems, but for the most part, we are now moving very, very rapidly into winterization.
Do I have some time, Chair?
You have another 40 seconds.
Okay. My last question for Mr. Daud from Humanity First. Thanks a lot for all the work which you do across the world. Like you mentioned about that you plan to build 500 houses. Is there any specific part where you are planning, and like what is your time frame on building those houses?
So we are in very early phase of assessment right now. We have not identified any particular area, but the 2 target areas that we'll be building these homes is in Sindh and the southern Punjab, where some villages have completely, the houses were completely destroyed, and we were primarily providing emergency assistance in those areas. And so because we have already worked in those areas, so we chose to help the population in those areas.
We now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses for being with us today. And above all, I'd like to thank you for doing what you do with your collaborators on the ground to help the Pakistani people. We know that since April of 2022, Pakistan has been experiencing a political crisis that is significant, accompanied by an economic crisis. My question is simple. According to you, and this is a question for all witnesses, how has the political and economic crisis, or have these crises been amplified by the floods? Or, on the reverse, in which way have the floods or the political instability and the economic crisis harmed the ground operations following the floods?
Sure, I can take a stab at it first. Thank you so much for the question. Economic crisis, I think it's globally, we've seen inflationary pressures throughout the world, including here in Canada. A country like Pakistan, as a developing country, has been impacted by that in a very significant way. So both the ability to respond in providing aid to people, and a situation where things had already become so expensive has exacerbated the situation. Even in the urban parts of Pakistan, which were not close to the flooding areas, when I was there, I saw the prices for household items, daily fruits and vegetables, quadrupling in kind of all parts of Pakistan. So I saw that impact firsthand. With respect to the political instability, we did see that at the time of crisis, the narrative on the media and the social cohesion had increased, and really all the political parties did get together to help the people throughout the country, where on the front pages of the newspapers and on the TV channels, instead of the political news being the forefront, the humanitarian crisis did take forefront, and Pakistanis have been quite generous in supporting throughout the country.
If I can just build to that, the crisis in Pakistan has really shown a great deal of resilience from the communities rallying together. And then they are absolutely helping each other. You're seeing, some widespread strikes that are even going to happen this weekend, which will make it impossible for aid agencies to deliver assistance. So some of those occurrences actually harm us and make it harder for us to deliver aid. And overall, you have an increased demand for services and needs by the sheer volume of people that need help. And it counteracted by a decrease in amount of available money, delayed money arriving, and then, of course, such rising costs, meaning that you can reach fewer people with those funds.
Désire-t-il s'exprimer sur la question?
Do you want to say anything about this issue?
I'll just add perhaps one thought, which is I think it's a very astute question. The country is facing a number of challenges simultaneously. The economic crisis, I think the most important implication will be on the fiscal room that the government has on the reconstruction side. And it's going to require a reformulation of the plans that were in place by the IMF, by the World Bank, and by the Asian Development Bank. I think that is now in process, but I think we're going to have to expect that the path of stabilization that had been agreed to by the multilateral organizations and the government of Pakistan before the crisis is going to have to be revised. I was in Washington at the World Bank 10 days ago at a flood meeting, and I saw a very keen awareness by all the players, especially the multilaterals, to look at everything that they had been doing in light of the floods. And that's going to be I think the requirement now, essentially a reformulation of the plans in light of the crisis and the needs for reconstruction.
Do any other witnesses wish to address this issue?
This is Aslam Dawood here. I will just add that we have tried to keep a low profile just to avoid any political impact on our responses. We have worked with local partners and local government agencies who have been helpful. But in Pakistan, because of the volatile situation, there has been risks to our volunteers. There has been rallies, and the people belonging to various political stripes have been causing some hindrances also in the relief work. So we have tried to keep the work in a very low profile way with the assistance of very local community and the local authorities over there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. We now go to MP Collins. MP Collins, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for your testimony and for all the work that you're doing in Pakistan. My first question is to Mr. Khan. Pakistan has contributed less than 1% to global warming, yet it's one of the countries that's being most impacted. I'm curious how you see Canada's role in supporting Pakistan, ensuring that around the world, we are better prepared for climate disasters. But also, COP27 is happening in the next few weeks in Egypt, and there's going to be lots of conversations about international financing for climate-related loss and damage. I'm sure the enormous damage caused by the flooding in Pakistan will be top of mind for people there. You spoke a little bit about the need for debt swapping and debt forgiveness and how that could help Pakistan with climate-related or climate-resilient infrastructure. In my mind, as a high-income country, but also with our historic and ongoing high per capita emissions, Canada has a responsibility to do more. Can you speak a little bit about what it would mean if this kind of debt forgiveness was implemented and why it's so important for Canada to step up on a global stage?
Thank you so much, MP, for the question. I think it's really, in some cases, Pakistan is maybe at ground zero for climate change impact. And I saw firsthand, hearing from the teams on the ground, that it was, just drought, that same area that's been flooded now for so many years, extreme drought-like conditions, right? And for a pastoralist society where most of the country, the way they earn their wages for vast majority of the country is either agriculture or animals. And both of those are impacted when you either have no water or, in this case, flooding and too much water. So I think there's a recognition that the impact of it will be very great, and Pakistan's contribution to carbon emissions is incredibly low, and obviously as the Western world, including Canada, it's high. So I think this is just one additional reason where there is a moral responsibility for Canada to step up and do more. It already has obviously made some commitments, but for it to be sustainable and for it to increase in magnitude is the need. And I think even speaking to everyday Pakistanis on the ground, there is a recognition that Western countries do need to do more for helping countries like Pakistan that face this with, again, there's more than 5,000 to 6,000 glaciers in the north, and they've seen those melting at a very rapid pace. So unfortunately, there's a fear that they may not even recover fully from this before we're dealing with this crisis again. So to get ahead of it, Canada has a large Pakistani diaspora. I think throughout the country, we saw that in terms of the interest for this appeal throughout the country. And I think a lot of Canadians, Pakistani Canadians, will be expecting Canada to do its fair share in the commitments that it makes at the global level, and in working with multilateral agencies like the IMF and World Bank to make sure that a country like Pakistan, where so much of its GDP is on debt financing, and it's really crippled with the amount of debt that it has to pay to the multilaterals, and so if we can convert some of that, and if we can utilize some of that to make it more climate resistant, prevention is always better than the cure. Sometimes the investment isn't that significant compared to what we're dealing with now, and just a little bit will go a long way. Thank you.
Thanks so much. A related question, Canada's official development assistance commitments are already severely low. Would you agree that ODA should be additional to our international climate financing?
Yes, absolutely. I think the more Canada can do to live up to its international commitments, I think it's going to go a long way in making sure Canada has a leadership position at the global stage on these important initiatives. So definitely the more the better.
Wonderful. And just the same question to Mr. Sharif. Would you agree, that our ODA should be additional to international climate financing?
Yes.
Thank you so much. And maybe just another question for Mr. Sharif. What were the needs in Pakistan before the floods, before COVID? And are you concerned that there will be declines in development indicators, things like girls' education, vaccination?
Yes. I'm afraid. I mean, what we're seeing is already the very long shadow of COVID was already casting, unfortunately, a very severe impact across the country, like it has frankly, in every part of the developing world, where the health crisis now of COVID has been overshadowed by a massive food security crisis, by an economic crisis, and by an educational crisis, not to mention the gender crisis that COVID has wrought. The floods, I think, simply exacerbate that. I don't think I'm afraid to say Pakistan is not unique in this situation, because, in a sense, the resilience of so many parts of the world has been depleted by the COVID crisis, and so government's fiscal room has been massively shrunk in many parts of the developing world. International donors' appetite and capacity in their fiscal room has been shrunk, and so I do think we're at a moment of very significant vulnerability across the world, and we're going to have to be prepared to think about what kind of response is both sufficient and strategic in light of what are almost certainly going to be very mounting needs.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, do I have any time left?
No, you don't. You're over your time.
Thanks.
Thank you, MP Collins. We now go to MP Jenis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much to all the witnesses for your testimony. More importantly, though, for your work on the ground. I appreciated the comments that were made with respect to the vital need for reform to the matching program. It is the intention of this committee to prepare a report following these hearings, and my hope is that the report will include a strong recommendation to the government to reform the way they do matching programs. As I mentioned previously, this is a problem we've seen in multiple different cases, and I think there are alternatives that the government could be pursuing that would achieve the objectives that it wants to achieve while also being fairer. I want to put the question, without asking it to anyone in particular, just open it up to whoever wants to, just about the challenges around minority rights in Pakistan and how we can ensure that development assistance is available to all communities, and also that Canada is playing a constructive role in addressing threats to minorities. I was very disturbed recently to read of just horrific incitement to violence against the Ahmadiyya Muslim community by one cleric in particular, calling for violence against pregnant women. And we have other instances of violence and legal discrimination against Christians and various other minority communities. Would any of you like to speak to the issue of how we ensure equal access to development assistance for minorities in the context of Pakistan?
I could go first here. It is true that in Pakistan there is racial and religious and ethnic turmoil where people are against one another. You just mentioned about the edict about attacking pregnant women, Ahmadi women. This is a very sad situation. And another incident was there were some tomatoes that was imported from Iran, and one group of people said that this should be destroyed because this is Shia tomato and Sunnis cannot have it. So this is a very sad situation, and this is because of illiteracy, because of fanaticism, because of lack of or misguidance that is being spread over there by certain factions. I think at the time of need, the country and the international community should ensure that the aid reaches out to all sectors, all groups of people without any discrimination. And that can be ensured by putting some conditions about that the government reports on how the aid was distributed, how various ethnic, religious, and other groups have benefited from the aid that has been provided. There's not much can be done about it because it's the people who are on the ground, who are fanatics, who take this action, but the government can be forced to prevent that, or at least stop the violence against the various ethnic groups and make the aid reach there.
Can I just jump in because of limited time? Dr. Jaid, you had a good suggestion there around conditions. To your knowledge, is that being done right now? Is the government attuned to these issues, or have they not taken those steps?
I'm not aware of it at all.
Okay. I want to try to get one more question in the next minute and a half, but does anyone else want to weigh in very briefly on minority rights?
I can just Yeah, I can just quickly, in 10 seconds. When I was in Quetta, we made sure that we were meeting with all of the faith groups. There's a significant Hindu community, a Sikh community, and Christian community. And where we can, I think, as humanitarian actors, NGOs, we do try to make sure there's cross-faith, that you're representing those communities to make sure any underserved, underprivileged, you can get the aid there.
Thank you very much. I know one issue when it comes to debt relief, and there's been some discussion of that, is the risk that debt relief by Western countries has the sort of perverse effect of leading to increased dependency on other lenders, in particular China. How can we explore that option, but in a way that doesn't lead to greater vulnerability, given existing indebtedness to actors that may not share our values?
I would just say we have to make sure that our values are actually being adhered to. I mean, if the way we program funding is not even equitable or ethical, how are we now going to turn around and talk about debt relief or other things if we're not even doing it properly as a government right now?
I know I'm out of time, but if anybody wants to follow up in writing on that debt relief question, because I know it's a bit technical, but witnesses can send written submissions afterwards, and that does contribute to the body of evidence that we use for our report.
Very much, Mr. Jenis. We now go to MP Gahir. You have 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for making time. And a big thank you for obviously the work that you're doing on the ground. My first question is for Mr. Sharif. So in regards to your third pillar, you talked about how we need to invest in preparedness. Well, I think back to over a decade ago when floods happened in Pakistan as well. And my question really is, I'm sure these discussions happened then as well. Has the world learned, how to give aid, better now after that? Or are we still in the same position now,
I think the honest answer, Mr. Chairman, is we haven't learned. I don't think there's any evidence in the analysis I've seen that we're making anywhere near the kind of investment we need to make in disaster risk reduction and preparedness. There was a global summit in Japan 10 years ago, maybe, that came up with a number of commitments. Not only does the analysis show it, common sense shows that if you can prepare and reduce risk, you're going to be spending far, far less than if you are always running to respond. And I do not think that we have made anywhere near the kind of investment that we need to make globally in this area. I'm very sorry to say.
Okay. In regards to your first pillar, you talked about the need for flexibility and assistance. The worry sometimes is that if strings aren't attached, then the funds won't go towards the purpose that they're intended for, and that they'll actually fill the pockets of people that will take advantage of it. So, do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. I wouldn't confuse flexibility with the lack of accountability. I think what I mean when I say flexibility is that we need to design our programming with a view to the actual needs on the ground so that we don't end up saying, look, we're only in a humanitarian phase, so we're only going to support humanitarian activity right now. That's blind to the fact that, in fact, even though there's humanitarian activity going on right now, at the same time, we have to do some of the early recovery and reconstruction work. So what I'm calling for is, in the design of donor funding programs, we're clear that we're going to have parameters which reflect the actual realities on the ground. The question of accountability is absolutely essential. I don't think that has to be compromised at all in the kind of flexibility I'm calling for.
Great, thank you. My next question is sort of open for all the organizations. We know that during disasters, women and girls are disproportionately affected. How are the women and girls of Pakistan affected by this flooding? Does the humanitarian response take into consideration the gender dimension?
This is Aslam Dak from Humanity First. Yes, we definitely take care of that. What we do is we ensure that the cultural values or the religious values are not impacted. And in the Orthodox societies where women would like to stay separately, so whenever we provide shelters, either we provide a family unit to the shelter or have a very separate space available for women, elderly women, and children who do not have a male member in the family, and also provide security to them so that they feel safe there. That's the key thing that we remember in the emergency phase. And at the time of the longer term phase, when we are looking into building some homes and or repairing the homes, we are giving specific priority to widows and women who do not have an earning member, so that they can really benefit from this help in the long term.
MP Kahir, I would tell you that all of our aid is designed at the family unit, which is really designed to get families access to clean water or families access to food hampers. And that goes a long way in really kind of addressing gender-based violence, because you're always ensuring that women and girls are the center and the core of the type of aid that you're giving. But I will point out to you that we're in a very critical phase in the world. There'll be 270 million people this year in need of acute humanitarian assistance. That's 4 times the amount of a decade ago. The money to meet those needs has not kept pace at that 400% increase rate, and we need to do things better as a sector in order to meet that increased demand.
And I'd just like to add the funding that Islamic Relief is getting from the matching through the Humanitarian Coalition and the government is focused on women and girls. So it's providing 4,250 women affected households with cash grants. It's making sure there's dignity kits, menstrual hygiene management for 9,000 women and girls. And lastly, but also most importantly, there's a research piece on the impact of climate on pregnant and lactating women and infants in flooded communities, with proposed recommendations to look at some of the long-term impacts.
Great, thank you.
We now go to MP Bergeron. You have 2.5 minutes, sir.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. According to a study published in last September by Children's Aid, only 1 out of every 5 people claims to have received the humanitarian assistance that was promised. And that's a fairly low proportion of the provinces that were most severely affected. Baluchistan and Punjab received humanitarian assistance. And for Baluchistan, we're talking about 8.4%, and for Punjab, 25.8%. In your experience, are these figures confirmed, and how do you explain such a situation?
I'm not sure if I understood the statistics correctly, but I think the overall point I do agree with in terms of the people that need aid as a denominator, and then the people who are actually receiving it. Those percentages are probably correct. Unfortunately, because of the amount of need that's there, also with a province like Balochistan, where the infrastructure the road infrastructure isn't there, where all the aid agencies and those the NGOs can get to everybody that's needed. There is a large gap there, and that's why, for example, with Islamic Relief, 1/4 of our staff is based in Balochistan, because that's where access is most difficult, and that's where we feel that the communities and villages may be neglected with the local NGOs.
I would also add to that the need is so widespread and immense, and it's throughout the country, and at different parts of the country, the flood is in different stages. As you know, Dadu is still underwater. Now Shara and other areas into the north are not, right? The local government has even made it so that you can't cross a provincial border with food because it's so widespread in terms of the need. So this is just a much bigger response. Remember, in 2010, when the floods hit here, it was 20 million people affected, and we thought that was the biggest event in the world. I remember leading the first team in for us into that. This is 33 million people. It dwarfs it. So it's just so widespread, and there's so many people in need, and that just means we have to double down on our resources and continue to work. And that's why we need more effective funding mechanisms.
Ron, you have 20 seconds.
un autre témoin qui soit...
Would any other witness like to add anything to that?
I'll just tend to agree to that. I don't have the exact numbers, but I would say that we are not reaching out all communities, all groups. There is still a tremendous need that can only be achieved by having more partners on the ground, more organizations responding, because each organization has limitations, but when you have a bigger group of organizations responding, then you will be able to reach out maximum people.
We now go to Ms. McPherson for the final 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sorry that I had to step out during the testimony. I was unfortunately giving a speech in the House. But it's been very interesting to hear. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the climate impacts or climate financing. We know Pakistan, of course, has contributed less than 1% to global warming, and yet they are bearing the burden of climate change, the climate crisis. So perhaps, Mr. Sharif, I'll just finish with you, if I could. How could or how should Canada be financing climate mitigation and adaptation better? How could it be better delivered? How could we ensure that it is reaching the most vulnerable people? It is using Indigenous knowledge. It is aligning with our feminist international assistance policy.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Look, I think this is a really important question. I'm sure I won't do it justice in the time we have. Let me say a couple of things in terms of principles of work. The first principle I would say is that worldwide, including in Canada, climate finance has had a very significant portion associated with debt and equity financing rather than grant financing. And while I understand why that aspiration might be there, I think it's very optimistic to think that the dire climate needs that we have can be adequately addressed through resources which are, frankly, non-grant resources that are going to have to be paid back somehow. There is room. There is absolutely room for the so-called innovative finance work here, but I would say that it is a very particular response. It's not going to be the generalized response. The second thing I would say is I think we probably have to be much more analytically precise about the specific issues country by country where we think we can make a real contribution. Let me take clean energy as an example. We've got, in many parts of the world, a situation where you've got both climate fragility but also energy poverty. That is to say, we need to expand massively the amount of energy available. At the same time, we're going to be much more conscious about carbon footprints. So we need to bring a lot of innovation to the ability of countries to develop energy security plans that rely and convert resources in those countries into sustainable energy sources. How expert are we at that right now? What's the relationship of our funding to that massive question? And a last example, it would be in agriculture. There is a massive opportunity for us to do much more in climate-smart agriculture. It's a very, very significant issue around the world. I think that we've got lots of opportunities to partner with communities. My sense is if we walk toward communities with ideas here, they will run toward us. But I think we need to make a commitment, and I think probably a lot of this is going to have to be grant.
Sharif, thank you, Mr. Singh, thank you, Dr. Daoud, and thank you, Mr. Khan. We are very, very grateful for each of you generously sharing your expertise with us. And we're also very grateful for all the extraordinary work you're doing on the ground in Pakistan. Thank you very much, and you can rest assured that your observations will be reflected in the final report that will be prepared. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wonder if the committee could quickly adopt 4 housekeeping items so that we can have a smoothly functioning committee before from now to the end of November. So the first housekeeping item I hope the committee will adopt are the 2 budgets that the clerk has prepared for us. So I move that the committee adopt the project budget for the study on the extreme flooding in Pakistan for the amount of $11,500, as well as the supplementary project budget for the briefing on the current situation in Haiti for the amount of $10,575. So I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, if the committee, through you, if committee?
Three budgets that were provided
Well,
by the clerk
to the
previously.
two budgets, because I think the third one.
There actually should be three, if
Yeah,
I'm
but
not
the
mistaken.
but I
Just give it to him.
okay. Okay. So all three, yes.
All three?
All three
Thank you.
budgets. So I
Very
moved the
kind of
third
you.
budget, which is the request for Bill S 223 for the amount of $5,225. Okay, so
So the budget for that.
I don't
for
want to study
extreme
the bill
flooding
at
in
all, so-
Pakistan. The witnesses can leave if they like. Thank you. You've been.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Sharif.
So I believe so
Yes, so it's for 223 extreme flooding in Pakistan
Yes.
and the situation in Haiti.
very quickly, the second item, housekeeping item, I hope the committee can adopt to help the committee and the clerk, is that a statement had been prepared by the analysts concerning the appearance recently of Yevgenia Kara-Murza in front of our committee. I think there was only one small change to the statement.
Yes, by Mr. Jennings.
Yeah, that
which,
added
is reflected.
Yeah, which I think everybody supports. So I'm wondering if the committee would adopt that statement so that it can be sent out by you, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Is there unanimous consent? Absolutely.
Okay, and then the third item I'm hoping that we can do is to adopt the calendar, which the clerk has prepared and that you, Mr. Chair, have distributed to members of the committee to the end of November, so that the clerk can invite witnesses and prepare November's meetings.
Is there unanimous consent to end of November? Excellent.
And I thought I had a fourth item, but I...
Study that we've received.
That's right.
We could approve the SDR.
Yes. So I move, Mr. Chair, that we received the subcommittee's report on international human rights, and I move, Mr. Chair, that we adopt that subcommittee's report.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Unanimous consent? Absolutely. Just two last things. I just like to remind the members one more time for witnesses for our Haiti study. We have till 5 o'clock tomorrow, please, because during the second hour of Monday, we will be hearing about the situation in Haiti. And with respect to Bill S-211, if everyone could kindly submit their witnesses by November 1st, and that's on Tuesday. Okay, thank you. Meeting adjourned.